winning trophies and all the rest of it. Now, Spurs is one of the only clubs over a sustained period of time that doesn't make substantive losses. So in some ways, they've won my table of good fortune. Whether that's any validation at all, that's a different story.
Yeah.
But the real point, I think, is ultimately, like Liverpool, like Brentford, Brighton have done for a number of years, is you've got to get that recruitment right. It's not like Spurs haven't spent money, just like other clubs. And if you get that recruitment right by putting the right structure in place, you are only measured by your on-field success in the end. No one cares whether you make millions of losses so long as it doesn't lead to bankruptcy. But what you've ultimately got to do is ensure some type of glory. And unfortunately for Spurs, the issue is that on a consistent basis, if the general benchmark is, are 50% of your transfers successful or not? And if you're over that threshold, you're doing pretty well. If you're under it, obviously there are issues. And unfortunately for some clubs, that threshold has been under for a particular period of time and over.
But I think there's a discrepancy in what a successful transfer is. For the fans, it might be Dominic Solanke scoring 15 goals. At the minute, the club are looking at bringing in these incredibly talented kids for their age, and the upside of the transfer fee 5 years down the line. And now it may turn out that these clutch of young players that we've got coming through turn Tottenham into a superpower in the Premier League. The likelihood is that we will demand big transfers. So for the club and Daniel Levy, it's our feeling that he will look at Archie Gray, and if he can get double the transfer fee in 5 years' time, that's a success. But for us as fans, that isn't a success. That's just selling off talent for the sake of for the bottom line.
I feel this is like a therapy session for
yeah.
you. I'm glad we can be a part of it for you.
Quinny, I'm going to bring you in. So I was just thinking of, as Daniel said before, the revenue brought in by Champions League football, but more often than not, I think it's only just one team who get into it. Is the fact that you've been so successful in getting into the Champions League now for so many years, does that almost kill the competitiveness in the SPL, even obviously between the two giants up there?
Yeah, it does make a big difference because it's just an extra influx of cash that isn't available like through TV deals or sponsorship to end the competition, obviously. But this year, like Celtic are on for like record-breaking like turnovers and everything else. Like Liverpool, somebody said it's 100 mil from what they've got. Scotland don't get as good a share on the TV split as like England and Italy and whatever. And I seen Kieran Maguire reporting Celtic already have clipped about 80 million from this transfer window. So, like, it was actually one thing I wanted to ask when I came here today for this segment was, with the UEFA stuff that we've got going on as well, it does feel like across Europe there might be a bit of a, maybe it's taken out of Scotland because, we're getting all this money coming in, but maybe across Europe there might be a wee bit more of a levelling of maybe the playing fields. Like, one of the things that makes the Premier League so good is there's Champions League players in every squad, like, quite clearly. Look at Paquetas and Guimareses and these kind of guys that don't win the leagues, don't win the cups, but they're like proper Champions League players sort of thing. So it's definitely taken a bit of competition out domestically, especially with all the stuff that Rangers have had over the last couple of years. But I look at it more as I'm coming down here and I'm looking at your squads and, all this stuff that's down here and thinking, in a couple of years, like, again, not to rabbit on, but I look at clubs in England like Brighton, Bournemouth, they've had 80 million of TV revenue or so come in for 3-4 years, and look at the squads and look at how competitive they can be. Celtic, after 3, 4, 5 years of 80 million, 100 million pound coming in a year on top of selling, O'Reilly's and whoever else. So I guess I'm kind of taking a question and throwing it across, but like, do you think that like all the UEFA guidelines that are getting imposed on everyone that plays in UEFA competition, as well as the Champions League being more of a competition, there's 10 games or 8 games in the group stage guaranteed and all that kind of thing. Do you think we might see more of like those Champions League players not ending up, with the greatest respect, always at the Bournemouths and the Brightons because it's a Premier League team, and they might end up at Celtic, Benfica, PSV, these sorts of places maybe?
Well, I think the damning stat, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, is, and usually the Deloitte Top 20 Money League, usually around 12, 13, 14 of those teams are Premier League teams. And so you query why that is. It's usually the Premier League distribution, City earning over 172 mil for winning Premier League, another almost 100 and beyond million euros for Champions League participation, all the commercial revenues, everything else that comes along with it. I think the interesting thing that Jamie mentioned is actually around competitive balance. I think there's got to be a real worry some people say worry, some people say concern, around whether the top teams in Europe, and to the same point on Super League and everything else that came from it, are going into a different stratosphere. Now, the whole point of the latest Champions League iteration was to ensure that there wasn't going to be a Super League to bring more money to the bigger teams, but the bigger teams are still going to be spending huge numbers. The question is whether this format actually helps competitive balance to a degree. Is it going to distribute the monies a little bit more equally, or are we going to see the last, quarterfinals and semi-finals with the biggest teams competing as usual?
Okay, Daniel, I'm going to throw a few questions at you. What's the most ludicrous clause you have seen in a deal?
I can't say too much for confidentiality, just in case I get struck off as a lawyer and then I can't be a lawyer. But the best one I saw was Neymar's one at Barcelona. So when he was there, apparently he had a clause that said every month he could have 8 of his best mates coming over from Brazil to have a party in Barcelona. So, I'd love to be able to have drafted that party clause, but that would have been a good one, I think.
What has been the most lucrative transfer you have seen?
For who?
You.
Well, I would say it's usually the ones you don't expect, actually. So sometimes the free transfers can be the most significant of all time. Like, I'd say even like a long time ago, Steve McManaman's deal to Madrid, because there was no transfer fee. Barca came in for him 6 months, 9 months before. We're going to pay Liverpool a fortune. I'm sure McManaman was on a huge wage at Madrid, and that was obviously 25 years ago, so now maybe.
Are the transfer deals getting done now for the summer? Is that all happening now?
Yeah, 100%. So, people, the slight issue is that for the clubs that are thinking about relegation or otherwise, then that's obviously the priority. And it's difficult to be able to plan 3 or 4 eventualities in a time. But from everyone from 12, 13 upwards, you're going to be getting 100, 120 mil from the Premier League, and you go from there. And then the top teams are obviously thinking in different ways around how they're going to recruit or otherwise. So I would say absolutely the top agents and the top chief execs and technical directors, they're thinking 3 windows ahead usually. Now, I will always phone up the agents that I work with and be like, oh, tell me what's going on next so I can help and plan and do. A lot of the time, it's still very reactive. Manager gets sacked, player gets injured, formation changes, whatever else it might be.